You actually don't need a big studio to create 3D title sequences like this. Jordan McBarnett, a 3D artist, and myself teamed up to create the title sequence for D2X's The Hunger Era using Cinema 4D, Redshift, and Adobe After Effects. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly how we made it happen. This is the breakdown. Let's get into it. Alright, so it all started with a phone call. Jordan McBarnett, a freelance 3D artist, hits me up and basically says this. Yo, there's this artist that's dope and he wants this trailer for his album, but they don't have money to pay for it. Are you down? And I was basically like, well, who's the artist? And he says, D2X. And I hadn't heard of him. So I said, well, let me listen to his music first. So his music, actually, let me just let the music speak for itself and we'll play it right here.
Wow, hands up, jumping through the crowd. I'm going 2,500 miles with 511 plaques in my halls right now. You got the first plat single.
Needless to say, yeah, he's on the come up, extremely talented. So I said, you know what, Jordan, let's do it. This is a creative project for the portfolio at the very least. We can stream the entire process as a part of the Twitch live streams while we work our other gigs during the day. Conveniently, I was right in the middle of personal projects and this was perfect timing. So everything was sorted. First things first, we had to come up with the idea. So let's get into that. So basically what we had to go off of is that they wanted a 3D trailer with the track names of each song and all the artists that worked on each song. Have it include Chicago related visuals because the artist D2X is from there. The element to reference in this piece that we basically had were the unreleased album cover, a track list, an intro song, and a location. But for us, since we're maniacs, motion maniacs as I say, that was good enough for us and we were ready to get started. So let's hop into that process because we live streamed the entire thing. So Jordan and I got on a call to brainstorm. We started pulling together ideas into a website called Miro, which allows you to pull together images, text, references, all on like this whiteboard, and you can interface it with other collaborators live. So this was like our brain dumping phase, story sparking idea phase. Some ideas that we had for story archetypes, cinematic compositions, cinematic language, all that sort of stuff were conceptualized in this phase during these live streams. Along with that, look dev, ref from the internet, gathered all this sort of stuff, and Jordan and I were sparking the ideas that we wanted to approach this in, visually and conceptually. We noticed that the album cover was mostly purple in its color balance, so we were pulling ref that had more of that purple vibe. After this, we continued to brainstorm what story archetype we wanted to use to guide the flow of the title sequence, and we ended up choosing a story archetype called Exploration. Exploration story archetype is basically a story structure that includes multiple environments connected by passageways usually directed and guided by a hero or character/object. In this case, the passageways would be the streets of Chicago. Traveling on them would bring us to different environments and scenes in different parts of the city. Once we developed the idea visually and conceptually, we also developed where the sequence was going to go structure-wise. Now it was time to storyboard and direct the visuals and the story further. For the storyboards, I always like to block out the main story beats first. We can go back and add shots to the sequence between these beats, but those added shots shouldn't change the essential needed beats for the story to flow. So essentially, after one of the brainstorm streams, late at night, I went to work on my Wacom and I started to block out and draw all the story beats for the scenes in the Chicago city that we were soon to build in 3D. The next stream, we had sketches that I blocked out that night to start with. The storyboards start off with a man floating in a purple hoodie just like the album cover above the Chicago city skyline. Now this entire rollout had superhero themes and they also brought that up as one of the things that they were doing with the rollout. There's this whole superhero element. So I thought, you know, what's the best superhero ability that everybody wants? You know, the most popular one is probably flying. So I storyboarded out this man, you know, in the purple hoodie, obviously being D2X, floating above the Chicago skyline. And the idea was to have that intro text behind him saying the Hunger Era as he's floating above the city, you know, flying above the city. The idea was to see iconic things like the Chicago bean in the city, also, you know, brick style apartments, and also just iconic Chicago buildings. Taking the sketches and the song that they sent us, which was the intro song that they wanted to use for the trailer, I was able to make an animatic, which an animatic is basically taking a very rough sketch or story beat and cutting it like you would with the footage to music and to sound effects. This is to get the general vibe of how the piece is going to be cutting together. Like I always say, animatics are a great great way to see if the edit is gonna work and the pacing is gonna work for the BPM of the track. You can convey an emotion in an animatic, even if the sketches are rough. After finishing the base first pass animatic, we had a base of what to build in 3D. This animatic was perfect for flushing out early mistakes that we were gonna run into later and that we'll get into later in the video. The animatic, now that it's made, is more of a guide than a rule. So we use that and we can jump into making the 3D scenes now. So first things first, now that I sketched a character floating in the sky, we need to do character rigging, clothes simulation. We also need to give the model a purple hoodie to emulate the album cover. Luckily, Jordan knows a process for creating human animation in 3D. So for this part, I'm just gonna let him explain his process.
Hey, I'm Jordan. I'm a 3D motion designer. Big thanks for Matt for asking me to showcase this part of the project. Since Matt storyboarded the D2X flying over the city skyline for the intro, we needed to create a 3D character for D2X. Since D2X had a purple hoodie in his album cover, we decided to base 3D character off of that. First, I addressed the character in Daz 3D and the clothing animation in Marvelous Designer, and finally compiled the scene, the character, and the camera animation in Cinema 4D. So let's get into it. For the D2X character, I used Daz 3D to create the base model. So software is completely free, but most of the models cost money. Thankfully, I purchased a model pack a while back while first using Dash 3D. I first reference to facial details to refine the look and animate the character accordingly. While the animations tools can be a little bit clunky in Dash 3D, I found it way easier to animate in Dash 3D than in Cinema 4D, since Dash 3D automatically sets keyframes when moving the character. This made animating the D2X model a lot simpler and a lot smoother. After animating, I exported the character as an Olympic file along with the textures and brought it into Cinema 4D. For the clothing, I used Marvelous Designer, a 3D clothing simulation tool, and applied the hoodie and the pants from the Saforio Digital Fashion Starter Pack. Basically, check out his work. The link is in the description. After simulating the cloth movement of the pants and the hoodie, then I exported it as an Olympic and as an OBJ. For the shoes, I already had a 3D model of Jordan 1s and parroted each shoe to the corresponding foot bones to ensure realistic movement. Finally, taking the Olympic file from Daz 3D, brought the character into Cinema 4D to finalize the animation of D2X flying over the city skyline, just for the intro shot. Matt sent me a couple city building models from Kitbash to unify our city and the environment. I used these models to build the city, similar to the storyboard shot that Matt created. While building the city intro scene, I included some iconic buildings from Chicago as a little bit of Easter eggs from where he's from. For lighting, we used redshift environment to create this foggy and mysterious lighting setup, giving the scene a moody and atmospheric feel. I added some extra side rim lights to the character to enhance the visibility and to define the model's character and clothing animation. I finished up the shots with setting up the redshift camera at different distances and animated the shots of the shoes, the hoodie, and the side profile subtly. Eventually, I got all of them rendered and were ready to send off to the final edit for text and color refinement.
Thank you, Jordan, for walking us through that. Everybody go check out his social medias, his YouTube and his Instagram. All will be linked in the description. Now that we have that animation from Jordan and a couple shots of the shoes and the hoodie and the skyline, we can go ahead and use that same city, since we are sharing assets, to build a sequence on the ground level and move the camera cinematically through it for the actual scenes. Since Jordan was covering more of the intro, I was focusing more on the actual start after the beat drops and we go into the track list. But the actual opening sequence was going to be bootstrapped by Jordan entirely, because that character animation that he did, woo, hands off for that. That is all him. So let's dive into the scenes that I was making. The first scene was the bean. Finding the model was pretty easy, and texturing it was even easier. I mean, it's just like reflective stainless steel. So boom, place the texture on and it's basically done. Add a street asphalt in, texture faintly in the back, then make everything hazy with the lighting so you can't see how quick this technique was, and then it's basically done. Next scene was the apartment window. This one was for the track called Fire. So as the camera goes past the window, there's fire in the apartment, symbolizing chaos and danger in a sense, and it also makes the track connect with the visuals more. For the fire simulation, I used Houdini, but I actually saved a VDB sequence of it a while back so I can import it into Cinema 4D forever without ever needing Houdini to use it again. If you didn't know what VDB means, it means voxel database, which basically means it stores transparent transparency in a 3D way so that you can import things like clouds between softwares, and it maintains 3D transparency and like volumetric shape. Think of it as like a 3D PNG. So I actually made this fire simulation back in college for this Warner Brothers Mortal Kombat animation where I had cauldrons of fire. And since I exported them out of Houdini as VDB sequences, I could use this fire for future projects because it's very easy to manipulate once you get into cinema and you get into the Redshift volume system. So once importing the sequence into a Redshift volume, you can basically hook it up to a volume material, and that allows you to edit color, transparency, heat, speed, absorption, along with other things. For this window shot, I actually set up an entirely special setup that was out of the city just because I knew this simulation was going to be heavy. To avoid crashes, I built this box with the same textures as the buildings we were using with the same fire escapes, and to make it look like a window that we were using in the city, but making it a separate file so it was a lot faster. Once again, that's a theme here. We're doing it a lot faster. The next scene to make was the graffiti scene, which went into a lot of revisions before reaching the final look. This happened to have a lot of process in the refinement, and shout out to Vinny Ultimus. I'll link him also down in the description. He helped out with the actual decals that we ended up putting on the wall, but this scene went through a lot of revisions. Parts of this process were out of order from the actual final sequence, like the city building and the record store, so keep that in mind as we look through this. It was sort of just a feel process, and all the assets that we were using wouldn't be possible without Kitbash. So all the assets, Kitbash was basically, you know, fueling, you know, the imagery here as we were compiling this sequence. If we had to model all this, obviously we were not going to be able to do it in like a couple weeks, obviously not. But there was actually a point in this project where I realized we had a big problem. I was shoving shots back into the animatic, and I realized there was no driving, connecting force for the exploration story archetype. For some reason, I decided to hop on this game called Watch Dogs 2, and it actually had some city inspiration that I was looking at from San Francisco, and it runs super smooth with a lot of cool animations from the city and skyline views. And basically I was driving around and I got chased by the police, long story short, and it gave me an idea. What if the driving force behind the exploration was actually different parts of the city that we were seeing from a car chase? So I figured we'd do something different than actual cop cars to make it a little bit more mysterious, and I had this taxi model that I decided to change the ad signs as a clear visualization of good versus bad. The ad sign would be replaced with red being bad and golden being good. With this new driving force, the exploration story archetype would be way stronger. I went and refreshed all the scenes, now incorporating the taxi car chase as the glue between them as I animated and built scenes at the same time in the next phase. So at this point, I had been switching out scenes and revising as we went day by day on stream. Basically animating and building parts of the city during the live streams, and then rendering when I ended the stream at night and went to bed. I started to add the taxi chase scene to the scenes that I already made, like the bean and the city street, and I also animated some aspect shots of the taxis flying by at certain points in the city. Then for some interactive car shots on the street, I decided to cut between the cars passing leaves and doing a leaf simulation of them getting blown by in slow-mo. This leaf blow-by simulation was accomplished by attaching a leaf model to a cloth simulation and actually running wind and turbulence in the way that we wanted to, and tweaking the time scale to get the pause of the moving hold exactly where we wanted it to be. Then after they chased through the city for a couple scenes, I needed to think of a climax and a conclusion that was very satisfactory but also made sense. So I thought I could build one of those on-ramps and like block it off with road signs, but have it still accessible basically. And at the top of the on-ramp, it'd be like in construction and not completely built, and a portal would like open up at the end of the on-ramp, and you know, the taxi would be able to fly through it. You may be like, that's super crazy, and what do you mean by that? But we're in superhero world, you know, like the guy's floating above the city. So the dude's literally flying above the city in the beginning, and we've already set that tone. So, you know, why not, you know, make the escape route be, you know, a portal, you know, Matrix style. But at some point, the golden taxi was gonna have to shake off the red bad, like pursuer taxis to actually get to this on-ramp. So this is where I decided to make a simulation of a crash, which is probably one of my favorite parts of this edit, even though it had to get cut down for time's sake. So I basically set up a scene with rigid body, colliders, and initial velocities with the taxis. Having the perfect collision was actually tricky at first because I needed the front car to escape, but after a while I finished with it on a stream, and we set up the camera angles, and the renders turned out great. Once the golden taxi shakes off the pursuers, we cut back to the man that's watching, you know, levitating above, watching this all go down, and he has more golden light on him now as the golden, you know, portal is open, you know, as he's watching this all go down in the city. The car animation actually going up the ramp was very tricky. There was a lot of finicking with that, and getting the drive up at the right angle took a lot of editing, but we managed to cut it together pretty convincingly. I set up barriers to get hit by the car in the rigid body simulation when it went off into the portal, but the final edit's pretty cut down so you can barely see them. Luckily, it doesn't detract from the idea. So after all these scenes got rendered, they got placed in the animatic, and I started doing more variations on the text and the title design, and basically dialed in this look for the tracks and the artist name. I figured the type needed a framing device, so this white fade box unifies them and basically contrasts the title a little bit more. So after all this hard work, the final piece was finally wrapping up, and the next streams were finalizing the last touches on text and title. Then we exported, uploaded, and next day sent the video off. So we sent it off to the team with the download link and waited for a response. They responded, and D2X hit us back up saying this. Turns out he loved it, and he ended up posting the trailer on all of his socials, and he collabed with Jordan and I on another post of the trailer. And also a cool part of the trailer release is that it was released on his birthday with the album. The project turned out to be a great network builder, as we got to work in communication with a team that is out here doing great things, visually and musically, and that's always great when we get to work with creatives that are in this space with us. Meeting new creatives and making dope stuff is what this is all about. So go check out D2X, The Hunger Era, if you have, you know, Apple Music, Spotify, pretty much it's out everywhere. It's a great album. If you like rap or any of the old school rap, especially maybe like Kanye, Jay-Z, you know, that sort of vibe. If you like any of that stuff, you'll probably love D2X. So go check out some of his music, and this is the final trailer. I'll play.
I'm guessing it's the price of being great. I'm steady balancing my faith. Sometimes you gotta go and beat the grass to rattle with the snakes. I came a long way from featherweight, from hooping now I elevate. All I wanted was be known for something, now I'm more than great. I was born to hustle, flex my muscle, now I'm on the way. Remember niggas doubted me, I conquered with a golden plate, it's set in stone. I just needed time to put my mind in place. HOD, that's on the way. The era where I meet with grace. The next chapter, get back to myself and I discover passion.
And yeah, I think it turned out great. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to let us know in the comments. There's gonna be plenty of breakdowns just like this coming soon. So I'm gonna go get to the I will see you